Thanks all, everyone, for coming. I appreciate it. I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about myself, just so it will help inform like why and how I paint. So I grew up in Greenwich, not too far from here, and my father's here. So I grew up in Greenwich, and my father was a stockbroker, a bond analyst in, go to Wall Street every day. So growing up, I had the option of becoming a stockbroker or a stockbroker. And so art was really not on my horizon as far as I knew. But a couple things sort of led me in that direction. One was, my mother, she later worked at Sotheby's, but she was sort of artistically inclined, and so was my father, actually. I remember you sculpting. He did a sculpture of my bust of my sister, and I just remember being sort of intrigued by that as a kid. But then a major thing was my aunt and uncle lived in Beirut, Lebanon, and so I went there when I was 13, and that was a complete eye-opener for me. It just blew my mind because it was completely different from Greenwich, of course. It was before the war in Lebanon, and back then I guess they described it as the Paris of the Middle East. And it was incredible. It was just beautiful, the architecture, the artwork, it was just incredible. And my uncle was a naval attaché, and so he was an incredible man. He knew 4 or 5 different languages. He spoke Arabic. And so he took me around, and he knew everybody in Lebanon. We would walk down the street, and the taxi driver would be saying hello, and everybody on the street, and he'd be yelling something at them in Arabic, and so it was just such an eye opener to me. We would go, and we'd go, and he'd want to get some lamb, but in Lebanon, you don't just go to the grocer. You walk down the neighborhood and find the guy who owns the lamb. And you say, I'd like that lamb, and they put an X on his forehead, and you think, oh, geez. And then the next day, the meat would show up at their door. So, it blew my mind. It was incredible, like nothing, and there, like a lot of cities in the Middle East, the sights and sounds and smells, your senses are just being inundated all day long. And so that was a big influence, and that really opened my eyes a lot. And then in high school, I had a back problem for a while, and I couldn't do sports for a while. So I thought, what else am I going to do? And I had actually drawn and painted since I was 5. And as a matter of fact, when I was young, I would draw so much all over the house that my parents had to designate a wall for me. They said, you can draw all you want, but this is where you draw. Not on the radiator, not on the walls. And I would always assign my drawings my sister's name, so she would get in trouble. And so she would get in trouble, and I would somehow get away with it. But not for long. Eventually they just figured it out. So I always drew, and I was actually a really good drawer. I could draw anything. And so that's how I sort of got through school in a lot of ways. But then when I had that problem in high school, I couldn't do sports for a year, and so I really started to concentrate on doing artwork. And I had a great art teacher who was just so supportive, and he really just said, you got to go with this. And so I did. I ended up going to Rhode Island School of Design, and it was just an incredible experience. So I just continued with my artwork. I taught for many years, and so as I get a little bit closer to this kind of work, I was before 2000 I was painting abstractly, but didn't really have so much of a focus. Was still sort of searching for what I really wanted to say in painting. And I continued to travel, especially to a lot of Eastern countries, Nepal, India, Thailand, and a lot of Islamic countries, Morocco, Istanbul. And that was a major influence for me, just because artwork I mean, they don't really think of artwork is more infused into their everyday life. It's not something that you just go to a gallery to see. It's part of their world. You know, it's on all the buildings. It's everywhere you look. The tiles, the walls, the sculpture, everything. And so that's a big influence, and I thought that was interesting. And in a lot of Islamic countries, especially, they think of they focus a lot on pattern because they think of pattern as a visual representation of their spiritual lives, almost like a visual mantra. And so that idea really started to intrigue me the more I was doing my own artwork. And then 9/11 came, and I had sort of a reckoning with myself as an artist, because I thought, you know, with such intense things happening in the world, how can I just be sitting here in my studio and painting away when there's major things happening out there? And so I came to the realization that, you know, this is my talent, and this is what I'm good at, and this is what I know how to do. And so I started to marry those ideas all together more. The influence of, you know, Islamic sensibility in my artwork, and the idea that went behind it, you know, the infusing, you know, just a spiritual awareness into your everyday life and artwork especially. And I really think that that's a really necessary part of the world these days, especially as we're in such conflict with Islam especially. And also, you know, we, in the news these days, we get such a skewed perspective of Islam especially, that it's such a rich and varied place, just like this country, so that, so I really want to focus on some of the positive sides of Islam, you know, that, you know, those kinds of cultures have to offer. And, you know, my experiences in a lot of those countries have all been incredibly positive. The people, you know, I had one experience in Istanbul where the taxi driver said, "You're not American, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm Canadian." Just because I knew he was asking that question for a reason. And he said, "Good, because if you were American, I'd kill you." And I said, "Okay, well, good thing I'm not American." Good thing I'm Canadian. But other than that experience, like, people have just been so incredibly warm to me. Like, people in Istanbul inviting me into their homes and, you know, spending hours with me, telling us about, you know, their lives and asking about my life as an American. And I would ask them their views on Americans, and for the most part, they had a pretty good perspective that, you know, Americans are as varied as they are, and that they see one particular side of America, and a lot of the more extremists see a very myopic view of America. So that was just interesting to witness and, you know, see from them. So those kinds of ideas started. I started to develop those in the abstract work more and more. And so while I don't take anything too specifically from, you know, in Eastern countries in terms of the imagery, I think about all those kinds of ideas. So, like, if we go around, I can show you some specifics. When I started thinking about pattern can very easily become sort of repetitious by its nature, and thereby sort of boring. And so what I started to think about was the possibilities of asymmetrical pattern. You know, pattern tends to be symmetrical, but so I started to play with asymmetry within a pattern kind of idea. You can think of sort of like Pollock as a person who sort of did that, where he didn't deal with pattern per se, but he ended up creating a pattern just as the result of the way he worked. Just that sort of repetition of movement and line and shape and everything ended up sort of creating a pattern, but it's completely asymmetrical. So anyway, I started thinking about those kinds of ideas, and like these paintings, this one, and the one, this one, oh, there's a third one, but also this one on the other side of the wall. I started thinking about the idea of, you know, creating a pattern based on a vertical axis. And so almost like a Rorschach blot, where you get symmetry based upon this vertical line. And so this central image is symmetrical, and these parts are not. So just sort of playing with those kinds of ideas. And with some of these paintings, this one is called Isis. I was thinking about, I have actually from Beirut, I have this icon on my desk of just a figure. It might even be Mother Mary or something like that. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's just a figure, just how they painted icons for 1,000 years. Centrally located, and there's something so powerful about just the centrality of it, just being so focused on that one figure. So I started thinking of those kinds of ideas in abstraction, and these are all based on Roman and Greek gods, the titles of some of these paintings, just because this figure seemed so powerful and centrally located, and it seemed in parts very feminine, but in parts very masculine, and sometimes both. So those kinds of ideas I found really intriguing.
Do your choice of colors stem from those connections with specific? I mean, are you thinking about the specific god, and like if it's a water god or something, or will you use blue, or do you not go that far?
Right. I wasn't trying to be too literal. I didn't even know I was going to title this Isis until later.
Okay.
But I was thinking of, especially with pattern, I'm thinking a lot of the positive and negative spaces. There's this famous story of the artist Arshile Gorky, who he was one time in a park, and a woman came along and said, "What are you drawing?" And he said, "I'm drawing that tree." And she said, "Well, I don't see a tree there on your pad there." And he said, "That's because I'm drawing the space around the tree." And so I think of that kind of thing a lot.